Hello, my name's Lenka and I'm going to read a book for you guys. Beautiful book called Extra Yarn by Mac Barnett, illustrated by Jon Klassen, who is a very popular illustrator who drew and made a book called I Want My Hat Back, which we love in this house. So, this book is all about generosity and doing things for others and craft, which I love. On a cold afternoon in a cold little town where everywhere you looked was either the white of snow or the black of soot from chimneys, Annabelle found a box filled with yarn of every colour. So she went home and knitted herself a jumper. And when Annabelle was done, she had some extra yarn. So she knitted a jumper for Mars too, but there was still extra yarn. And when Annabelle and Mars went for a walk, Luke pointed and laughed and said, "You look ridiculous." "You're just jealous," said Annabelle. "No, I'm not," said Luke. But it turned out he was. And even after she'd made a jumper for Luke and his dog, and for herself and for Mars, she still had extra yarn. At school, Annabelle's classmates could not stop talking about her jumper. "Quiet!" shouted Mr. Norman. "Quiet, everyone. Annabelle, that jumper of yours is a terrible distraction. I cannot teach with everyone turning around to look at you." "Then I'll knit one for everyone," Annabelle said, "so they won't have to turn around." "Impossible," said Mr. Norman. "You can't." But it turned out she could, and she did, even for Mr. Norman. And when she was done, Annabelle still had extra yarn. So she knitted jumpers for her mum and dad, and for Mr. Pendleton and Mrs. Pendleton, and for Dr. Palmer, and for little Louis. She made jumpers for everyone except Mr. Crabtree, who never wore jumpers or even trousers, and who would stand in his shorts in the snow up to his knees. "No jumper for me, thanks," said Mr. Crabtree. So she made Mr. Crabtree a hat, and even then Annabelle still had extra yarn. So she made jumpers for all the dogs and all the cats and for all the other animals too. Soon, people thought, soon Annabelle will run out of yarn. But it turned out she didn't. So Annabelle made jumpers for things that didn't even wear jumpers. Things began to change in that little town. News spread of this remarkable girl who never ran out of yarn, and people came to visit from around the world to see all the jumpers and to shake Annabelle's hand. One day, an archduke who was very fond of clothes sailed across the sea and demanded to see Annabelle. "Little girl," said the Archduke, "I would like to buy that miraculous box of yarn, and I am willing to offer you £1,000,000. "No, thank you," said Annabelle, who was knitting a jumper for a pickup truck. The Archduke's moustache twitched. "2 million," he said. Annabelle shook her head. "No, thanks." "10 million," shouted the Archduke. "Take it or leave it." "Leave it," said Annabelle. "I won't sell the yarn." And she didn't. So that night, the Archduke hired 3 robbers to break into Annabelle's house, and they stole the box and took it to the Archduke, who set off across the snow and sailed over the sea, back to his castle. The Archduke put on his favourite song and sat in his best chair. Then he took out the box and lifted its lid, and he looked inside. His moustache quivered, it shivered, it trembled. The Archduke hurled the box out the window and shouted, "Little girl, I curse you with my family's curse. You will never be happy again." But sailing across the sea, turned out she was. There you go. She got her yarn back, and it only has yarn in the box for her, and she could knit her beautiful jumpers for everybody. Isn't that such a sweet book? I hope you enjoyed my story, and have a good day.